Ah, look at all these potential skill combinations and decorations for my weapon. Alright, let me just put my greatsword glasses on. Okay, I think I'll do these two then. Hello, my fellow hunters, and today I want to talk what is arguably the biggest single change to the Monster Hunter formula that Wilds did. Arguably. And that is alter something that's sort of been fundamental for generations and generations. The skill system. Not necessarily in its function, it's pretty much just world right, but in its distribution. The armor and weapon split. Taking every skill in Monster Hunter and every new skill that Wilds added, giving it either a weapon offensive tag or an armor defensive tag, etc., and dividing them down the middle, and inherently restricting what you can get from where and how much by putting everything in camp weapon or camp armor. And is that ultimately, this far on, a good thing? How has it actually shaken out? Well, I think to start with, I want to say that it's no better or worse than any other method, at least for me. Because look, ultimately, no matter what system Monster Hunter does, okay? Whether you're putting decorations and skills on just your armor and nothing in your weapon, whether you're collecting endemic life and giving each one of them a little amulet that gives you a skill as long as that animal is in your backpack, it doesn't matter how out there it goes, you're going to have a min-max, you're going to have the correct best build to use for each weapon, you're going to have the most valuable, potent, sought-after skills, and you're going to get them in the largest, most efficient amounts possible. And it doesn't really matter what form that takes, that's going to be the outcome. Now, depending on the system used, that form is more varied or less varied, but in all cases, it's going to trend towards that if you don't play, fun stuff, which you should, because fun builds in Monster Hunter are particularly fun. Also, I would love a Monster Hunter game where our power comes from endemic life that we attach magical decorations to. In any case, with that out the way, I don't think that build variety in Wilds is perhaps in the best place. There is a lot of overlap between the weapons. Now, that was also the case in World and Iceborne. You still had, essentially, you fill your critical eye, you fill your weakness exploit, you fill your attack, you fill your agitator, at least later in Iceborne when we got the secret for it, right? You fill your weapon-required side skills like focus on a greatsword, and pretty much every weapon still sort of looked like the ridiculous wall of power that Fatalis armor ended up giving you. So I think when it comes to variety, my main issue is that something like Switch Axe and Greatsword essentially has the exact same build at the moment because they want and value the exact same skills from the exact same places across the armor. And that sort of feels consistent across all 14 weapons, for the most part. One of the big reasons for that is affinity. Because armor can give us affinity, well, we're always going to get that affinity from armor because it's the cheapest, easiest, efficient source of it. We're always going to use the weapons to give us damage that armor can't give. That's why something like Critical Eye, a previously super valuable across-the-board skill, has been completely murdered in Wilds, because there's no real point of wasting your weapon slots on affinity when armor can get you to 100% and then some, or at least very close in most cases. And as the title updates roll on and we get better and better options, we will just have consistent 100% affinity across the board, most likely. So that has kind of turned it into, no matter what you're doing, right, unless for some reason you don't care about affinity, you're using your armor to get as much affinity as you can, then you're using your weapon to get as much damage as you can. And that doesn't sound awful in a vacuum, but it does make things rather homogeneous between the weapon. Now, there is other things going on your armor, your agitator, your foray, and so on. And agitator comes in a lot, of course it does, it's a very, very potent skill. Something like foray and peak performance and the other niche raw increases on the armor just don't get a look in, though hopefully that will change as we get more and better supporting armor sets and maybe set bonuses for those kind of skills. But you basically have affinity from your armor, and then agitator too, if you can make it work, occasionally just making a choice between Wex or agitator, but you're kind of there. Counter-strike has become pretty universal, it's the most efficient skill in the game, so that is just essentially all over the place. Even if your weapon can't hyper armor trigger it, you're probably going to get hit once every 45 seconds, which still makes it incredibly good. You've just got to be honest with yourself. In any case, then, this leaves us, as I say, in that situation where generally we get affinity from armor and power from weapons. But as I said, that's not inherently bad, it's just a little bit too cut and dry. We're always going to be seeing something like Counter-Strike, Maximum Might, Antivirus, Weakness Exploit, Agitator, alrighty. Until we get the armor levels where we can have skills past those, that's kinda gonna be the thing. And look, talking about whether the skill split was successful means that talking about Gore Magala set bonus being too good that it might just be there the entire game isn't really a thing for this, but I will say, because again it works into the affinity thing, 2-set Gore Magala is so valuable because of 3 antivirus, which is of course an armor skill, that hasn't helped things. It's basically pigeonholed that into a lot of setups. Arguably a little bit less recently, but it's kind of funny that even the new Arch-Tempered Radau armor with its quite potent free set is just of course naturally being paired with Gore Magala 2-set. Though, talking of set bonuses, a system like this should encourage them more, because we don't need to use armor to get skills that we have to get on our weapons, like critical boost and so on. We can fit in set bonuses and still get the skills we do need from armor, and I think in general, as the game's life cycle goes forward through title updates, we might start to see set bonuses play more and more of a bigger role, because they start to define a bigger and bigger chunk of our power. We've seen that with Gore Magala, we're seeing that with your Arch-Tempered Apex set bonus, and I think that that is something to perhaps look forward to. I think one of the biggest, perhaps, issues with the split, though, is that some weapons feel a lot better than others because of it. So, for example, Greatsword, I just need to put in 5 critical boost and 3 focus, right? That feels good. I get the full crit boost to go with the ridiculous affinity coming from armor, and then the focus for my nice comfort skill. Longsword can do similar, you know, 5 crit boost, and then use the final slot how they like. Whereas when you have weapons that have a lot of skill tax, i.e. weapon-only skills that they need to have in order to function, maybe power prolonger, or your guard skills, focus of course is one of them, offensive guard, though that feels good if you can use that because that's really potent, but basically if you're a weapon that's stuck on critical boost 3 because your other 2 Artian slots have to give you mandatory make the weapon function properly or better skills, then you start to be a little bit, because in the previous system you could have your cake and eat it too in that respect. It was much easier to get those mandatory weapon specific skills when you could just fit it in more efficiently across your entire armor set. So I think that is definitely something to think about, and that kind of works against Wilds when it comes to non-Artian weapons with triple 3 slots, because it becomes even harder to get both the damage you want out the weapon slots and those required, well, niche skills to actually make your weapon feel functional. So that's something that I hope gets looked at. I would like to see, essentially, a few of the weapon skills get moved back to armor. Things like power prolonger, things like guard, things like maybe even focus, honestly, and have weapon stuff be purely make your numbers bigger, so every weapon can kind of equally make their numbers bigger. That said, that kind of would result in a situation where every weapon essentially just puts the same decorations in their Artian because there isn't other options really. There's just the mathematically best way to use 3 slots to do more damage, so that has its own pitfall, but I think in essence there are a few skills that are on armor that should be on weapons and a few skills on weapons that should be on armor, and I think maybe a Master Rank expansion might address that and make things a little bit more comfortable to actually set out for certain weapons. I also think there's an argument to be made when it comes to reassigning what is in what category, that maybe it could would have ended up more interesting if they had actually stuck to what it initially sounded like, which was no offensive skills on armor, only offensive skills on weapons. That way it would have resulted in, yes, just the correct way to build weapons with limited offensive gain, but armor would have ended up so much more creative and varied across the board because everyone individually values different utility, defensive, and helpful niche skills that don't bring damage but do help you, and then everyone could just have their own little personal armor setup that gives them a basket of nice skills to have that don't increase damage because you can't increase your damage from armor. There is actually a world in which they should have gone all in just no damage from armor, have fun making unique comfy sets, and that might actually have resulted in a more interesting system. It is food for thought there. I also think there's a certain element of synergy not there between your weapons and armor. You can do some really cool things if you get certain skills from armor and certain skills from weapons to combine them for a result. And we do actually have a really good example of that. And that is, of course, Mizutsune. And while Mizutsune weapons aren't really the best, Slicked Blade is a really nice little preview of what could be achieved here with the peak of this system. Because we have weapon skills, we can have unique, powerful skills tied to a weapon, balance it because of the stats of the weapon that it's tied to, and that adds a lot of potential. That adds some interesting choice. Then you go the step further that Mizutsune has done, and tie its unique weapon skill to its unique armor set bonus, and then we start to have these combinations of armor and weapon that go above just how to get the most maximum might agitator weakness exploit possible, and that is really fun. Obviously, numerically, it's either going to be better than the former or not, and if it is, then you do it, but it is certainly interesting, especially as you could easily have it so different weapons prefer different unique set bonus and weapon skill combinations. Now, Slick Blade, of course, failed because it's just not strong enough in the slightest, but the idea of having unique skills tied to weapons, like White Flame Torrent, even if they're not supported to armor, I think is actually a colossal W of this system, and it's simply just not been explored or pushed enough in at least base wilds. I think choosing a weapon based on the skills it gives you is probably where wilds should go when it comes to its Master Rank expansion, or indeed more title updates, because that's the one thing it can do that other monsters can't. Make that inbuilt skill matter so much more that you are actually making informed weapon choices, not just on their affinity, their raw, their sharpness, but on those skills, whereas it's not really mattered. It would matter more if Artian didn't exist, because some weapons do go ahead because of their inbuilt skills, even if their raw stats wouldn't make them the best, and Artian kinda just supersedes that with its 3/3 slots, but I think the idea of having unique, powerful, or niche synergistic weapon skills that then can work with armor too is the real strength of this system, and I would love to see more and more pairs like Slicked Blade and the Mizutsune set bonus. I think that would be really, really interesting, especially if you could make some of them decorations too. Imagine having an Artian, let's say, putting in 2 3-slot decorations that each give 2 unique weapon skills, and then pairing that with 2 set bonuses from 2 different monsters that work with those weapon skills, and then we could start to see something happen. Honestly, you could have made it so gore magala weapons are what gives you 3 antivirus and not make it a skill on armor. Then you can make the choice to use gore magala weapons for that extra affinity, or give it up and not, and that might be the self-balancing for the gore magala armor set in general. So that's actually the hypest thing to me about this, and I think that kind of brings me to the bottom line here. I don't think it's really worse or better than any other given Monster Hunter system. I think the need to min-max and efficiency out your armor will always result in anything eventually feeling a little bit homogenous. That's just the nature of, you know, video games where you make a build, and not something that really anyone can fix, because it's incredibly difficult to fix that, because there will always be a correct answer when the highest number is the goal. but I do think that Wild specifically has the potential to disrupt that with actual pairs of weapon skills and armor skills and set bonuses that might result in functions that you actually can value over just raw number increases, like put all the affinity on your armor and then put all the critical boost in your weapon, have a nice day. So essentially, I think where this leaves me is I'm happy that they have tried this, done something different. I think that's always good about Monster Hunter in each new entry, actually doing stuff that shakes things up, and I think the potential here with feedback and learning for a master rank of Wilds edition that actually does some really creative, fun stuff with weapon armor skill synergy is there, and that's what I'm really excited for. In any case, let me know what your thoughts are on if the weapon and armor skill split was a success, and if you'd like it to just be the standard for Monster Hunter going forward, or if you just want it to be Wilds and its Master Rank expansions thing, and then we try something new or go back to normal for the next generation or the next portable title. In any case, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.